13. The family as trustee. Two interesting items with respect to divorce indicate an aspect of marriage too seldom considered. First, the overwhelming percentage of divorces are secured by women, not by men. Immediately after World War II, when it was assumed that many men would be divorcing unfaithful wives, the percentage was still highly on the side of feminine initiative. Earlier, 86% of all divorces had been gotten by wives. In 1945, it dropped to 75%. It can be granted that many of these cases do involve masculine initiative, with the husband allowing the wife to secure the divorce for face-saving reasons. But in spite of this, feminine initiative is surprisingly high. Second, the better the income, the less likely a divorce. It is often assumed that divorce is most common among the wealthy. In reality, it is most common among the poor. A study by William J. Good from 1956 indicated this clearly. Quote, "For although the divorce rate is often thought to be highest among the neurotic, success-driven middle class, actually it is highest among the lower economic classes. National census data show that men earning less than $3,000 a year are 2 to 4 times as likely to be divorced as men earning over $4,000 a year." End quote. Clearly, a major restraint on divorce is the possession of property. On the one hand, men are restrained from breaking up a marriage too readily because of the severe penalties of a division of community property, as well as the possibility of alimony. On the other hand, women are less likely to leave a marriage if the inducement of property and income is strong enough. It should be added that the large number of deserting fathers are to be found on the lower income levels. Property is thus an important restraint on the conduct of men and women. Private property is a stabilizing force for the family and society. When the state dispossesses the family of property and replaces the family as the custodian of property, the marriage tie is harmed thereby. The communist thesis that marriage and monogamy are products of private property is clearly wrong, but the family is the major custodian of property in all history. To rob the family of property is to weaken its power over its children. Children and property, these are the two major areas of social function for the family, apart from the prior educational and religious functions. Socialism attacks parental control over both children and property in order to ensure the priority of the state in society. The functions of the family are thus major and difficult ones. Its religious and educational tasks are central to life in their respective areas. They are aspects also of the family's custody of children. The care of property as an inheritance, a social force, and a religious responsibility is again important to society. Not surprisingly, marriage is seen in Scripture with tenderness but without romance. It is very clearly described as a yoke, 2 Corinthians 6:14. A yoke is a tie binding two creatures together in pulling burdens. Marriage is also described in Scripture as trouble in the flesh, 1 Corinthians 7:28, rendered outward trouble by Moffat. Marriage is clearly a working partnership of man and wife in the service of God, exercising dominion in their appointed spheres. Proverbs is revealing in its indications of marital life and standards. There is no reference in Proverbs to anything but monogamy. Together, husband and wife have a duty to instruct their children in God's law and in family discipline. Proverbs 1:8-9, 6 verse 20, etc. The working relationship of husband and wife can be a great joy or a major disaster. Every wise woman buildeth her house, but the foolish plucketh it down with her hands. Proverbs 14:1. In brief, quote, "On her constructive womanly wisdom chiefly depends the family's stability." End quote. "Whoso findeth a wife findeth a good thing, and obtaineth favor of the Lord." Proverbs 18:22. Indeed, house and riches are the inheritance of fathers, and a prudent wife is from the Lord. Proverbs 19:14. God gives a greater inheritance than material wealth in a prudent wife. A virtuous woman is a crown to her husband, but she that maketh ashamed is as rottenness in his bones. Proverbs 12:4. Precisely because marriage is so important an institution, personally and socially, a bad marriage is a disaster comparable only to rottenness in his bones, which makes it difficult or impossible for a man to stand. This partnership of man and wife acted as custodians of property. Custodians because the earth is the Lord's, and the land shall not be sold forever, for the land is mine, for ye are strangers and sojourners with me. Leviticus 25:23. The family is the God-given, God-ordained custodian of property. The dowry, Genesis 30:20, 34:12, and Exodus 22:17, was not a bride purchase fee, but the bridal gift by the bridegroom to the bride to seal the marriage in terms of godly responsibility. A marriage was truly and legally a marriage only when a contract specifying the property arrangements existed. Such a requirement was common to antiquity and appears, for example, in the Code of Hammurabi 128. Quote, "If a man take a wife and do not draw up a contract with her, that woman is not a wife." End quote. Clark's comments on the dowry in American law are of interest. Quote, "Dower had likewise been an institution of the English law since early Anglo-Saxon times, and of American as well. Indeed, it has been said of this right that it is as widespread as the Christian religion and enters into the contract of marriage among all Christians. But in recent years, the right has been modified or abolished in many jurisdictions by statutes conferring greater benefits upon widows than these which dower gives. In modern law, dowry is ordinarily understood as being the right of a widow in respect of the property of her deceased husband." End quote. There is a difference, however, between the modern widow's dowry and that of biblical law. In the modern dower, the widow is provided for only if there is an estate which will be of sufficient size to care for her. In biblical law, the dowry preceded marriage, and the children had an obligation of support to their parents as needed. The biblical family can be compared to a corporation. A corporation differs in that it is an artificial legal person and is created by the state. A corporation does not die when its founders die or when its officers die. It continues to exist legally apart from its stockholders, who continue as long as they are alive to draw dividends from it. Similarly, the family is a corporation consisting of parents and children. It pays out dividends to the children in care, support, and inheritance, and it returns dividends to the parents in care and support as needed. As a corporation, it administers its properties and income in terms of its ordained and God-given purpose. For this reason, no arbitrary or purely personal decisions can govern the decisions of members of the corporation. They are both individual persons and a corporate entity, and their truest function is in terms of a full consideration of both offices under God. For the state to enter into the control of either children or property is to transgress on the sphere of the family and to claim to be that corporation whose life is the care of the family. Such a claim is a major transgression against God's law order. If to this transgression is added a loss of faith, the family then becomes an institution whose main function is to provide a shelter and a sexual outlet for two atomistic and sometimes anarchistic individuals. An example of this appeared in the Ann Landers column of August 16, 1969, a man writing to declare that, quote, "all wives should be shot when they reach 40, end quote, because who wants an old tomato?" Marriage in this perspective is a physical convenience for the satisfaction of man, or conversely, for the satisfaction of a woman. It is in essence a lawless union, even though contracted under law. Not surprisingly, it produces lawless children with no respect for authority or for property. Instead of relying on God's law, the atomistic antinomian person, like the decadent Romans of old, relies on the power of sex as a cure-all for man and society. The woman then must out-Venus Venus to maintain her position. The atomistic family can only create an anarchistic world. As Zimmerman has observed, quote, "The family system plays a key role in the problem of social change. It brings the past into the present. The events of the present impinge upon it and try to alter it. Out of this past, with its alterations, we get the pattern generator for the culture of the future. Thus, we cannot understand the family without combining three sets of ideas: the past and present natures of the family system and the tendencies for current events and philosophies to alter its nature. Neither the study of the development of the family system nor the impingement of present events upon it is sufficient unto itself alone. The family is a living, growing institution, capable, as the poised bee for flight, of moving in any number of directions." End quote. Before the family can reverse its course and that of society, it must have a biblical law faith rather than a humanistic and atomistic one. The family must again become the trustee of God's covenantal requirements, and a trustee under God of children and property, not the trustee family of paganism, strong but humanistic in orientation, but the trustee family of God. This is the need. The biblical view of property will be discussed later, but for the present, the case of Naboth can be cited, 1 Kings 21, 1-14. For Naboth, the land was not his to sell. Everything he had, land and vineyard, was an inheritance from the past, as a trust for the future. Naboth, as a good steward, had no doubt increased the value of that inheritance, but this did not make any of it his own. As head of a family, he had an inheritance as a trust, not as a means to self-indulgence, and therefore his basic obligation was to the future. In China, by means of ancestor worship, the trustee family was bound to the past. In biblical faith, because of the creation mandate, the trustee family was geared to the future. The modern family, because of its atomistic humanism, is geared to the present, and is thus destructive of both the past and the future. The man who proposed to Ann Landers that all wives be shot at the age of 40 was a logical humanist. The past has no meaning. Only the existential moment matters.